voice can break the dark. A single spark ignites the heart. But if we turn when justice calls, the chains we forge will bind us all. When truth is silenced, when lies take hold, the cost is freedom, the soul grows cold. No one stands tall while another must fall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, defending every voice, defending every right. For the moment we falter, the moment we stall, we lose our own freedom when we let others fall. You can't stand free while others kneel. When justice fades, it's freedom they steal. An innocent condemned, a crime unspoken, and with it the bond of liberty is broken. No tyrant rules without our consent. Oppression thrives where silence is spent. Stand for the weak, the silence is small, or freedom will crumble for us all. We're mavericks of freedom, guardians of the light, fighting for the truth, for what is just and right. For the rights of one are the rights of all. We rise or we fall by answering the call. Even those we may oppose deserve the rights we all uphold. For if we deny them what is fair, we build our own prison in despair. The fight's not easy, it never will be, but justice for one is the key to be free. We stand as mavericks, together we strive, defending the rights that keep freedom alive. We're mavericks of freedom, rebels in the fight, upholding every truth, protecting every right. When one is oppressed, we're all in the thrall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all. So take a stand, let your courage rise. Defend the truth, don't compromise. For the soul of the world, the writing's on the wall. Freedom for one depends on freedom for all.
Greetings, Mavericks and new viewers. Tonight, direct and live from the Maverick News Network World Studios. This is Maverick News with Rick Walker.
Welcome back, everyone. Great to have everybody here. Hello, Mavericks. What a show we have for you tonight. Not just a show, it's a program. I don't like to use that word show. It makes me think of a circus. And even though the world is something of a circus these days, we try to keep it real here and focused on programming. And when I say programming, I don't mean programming your mind, but we have somebody tonight who understands people who try to program your mind. Dr. Jonathan Lockwood, Colonel, U.S. military, retired, intelligence expert on Russia, expert on Ukraine, expert on intelligence. He's going to join us to give us new insight into what's going on over in Ukraine and what's going on maybe even in Vladimir Putin's mind. Why won't he stop? Why won't he quit? What's his view on Ukraine? And maybe even more importantly, what's his view on the United States, Donald Trump, and U.S. strategy? We'll get into all of that. Plus tonight, massive rally for Pierre, conservative leader in Oshawa tonight. Thousands and thousands of people out for his rally this evening. We we'll try to maybe touch on that a little bit, but we have our special guest lined up tonight. Oshawa, the big focus there, because of course that's a big auto town in Canada, and tariffs front and center, top of mind for people tonight, because they've really taken effect now. And yet, even as they take effect, everybody's still confused about exactly how they work, what levels they're at. It's sent the stock market into a tizzy. It's crashed today. Massive losses on the stock market. The Dow Jones way down. We'll talk about that later on tonight as well. And then Mark Carney saying that, yes, Canada will retaliate with equal tariffs against U.S. produced vehicles that are not CUSMA or USMCA, however you want to say it, compliant. So vehicles that don't have enough North American content in them produced in the United States will be subject to a 25% tariff if they're imported into Canada, just as similar vehicles heading from Canada into the U.S. Will be hammered with a 25% tariff going that way. But even as we speak, it's still confusing, and everybody is trying to sort things out. Kind of chaos at the borders right now. And then the other big news today, Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Lich, Chris Barber, both found guilty on mischief charges, but they did beat a number of the other charges. 2 convictions for Chris Barber and 1 conviction for Tamara Lich. All their other charges, basically, they were dismissed, beaten, not going to have any impact from that, but sentencing still to be determined for both of them. And as a result, even their lawyers, including Mr. Greenspan, one of Canada's top lawyers, not able to really comment on the verdict today. So not really much said as he left court. All that and a whole lot more coming up right here on the Maverick News Channel. So don't go away, because our special guest joins us on the other side of this.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
I wanted to give everybody that off the cuff news update before we got into our feature interview here tonight, because there's so much going on. But this is also extremely important and very valuable. I'm sure this is going to be, of extreme value to everyone here tonight. Here's our special guest for the evening. A great honor and a privilege to have you join us tonight, sir. Jonathan Lockwood, thank you.
It's a genuine pleasure for me to be here with you and your audience. This is a unique opportunity, and I especially like the name of your network there, Maverick News, because I myself has always been considered by all my peers and all my people know me throughout my life as very much an unalterable nonconformist. So Maverick just suits me to a T. So. Go ahead. Oops, you just went mute on me. You just went silent on me. Check it.
Perhaps that helps.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah. Computer does that every once in a while, but thank you for letting me know.
Oh, that's okay. The wonders of the 21st century.
Yeah. Well, we are kindred spirits in that respect, but I have to give my dad credit for the name, because he's the one who told me that I was something of a nonconformist. He called me a maverick years ago, and that's where the name really
there
came
you go.
from. Yes.
That works.
Yeah. But you really, I'm just going to throw it over to you to kind of introduce yourself so that I don't mess this up, because you have a very long list of credentials.
Yeah, that would be a bit of an understatement. Several of my colleagues have commented my resume, really has gravitas, and okay, I'll grant that. One of the outstanding things is that, for one thing, my interest in military intelligence and military history and wargaming go back to when I was about 13 years old. And I was introduced by a friend of mine to the war game Battle of the Bulge by Avalon Hill. And that piqued my interest in military history. And from there, I began studying other military history campaigns, the study of warfare in general, intensively. And eventually that led me to an interest in being an intelligence officer. And so from there, I was studying and wargaming various campaigns. And then eventually in high school, I joined the junior ROTC battalion there in my high school. And I applied for West Point and got an appointment. And of course, which was also really interesting because I had that and a 4-year Army ROTC scholarship to any program in the country that had an ROTC program. But the thing is, I thought that I had it all figured out. There were a couple high school classmates who were at West Point, and they told me everything what I could expect. And I, had memorized all the necessary plebe knowledge and all that stuff. And what I did not realize was that because it was not what I knew, but it was what I was, an unalterable nonconformist. And West Point hates nonconformity. Oh my. And I was able to withstand it for about 16 months. And then I said, okay, I've had enough of this. So I resigned, left the academy, and transferred into ROTC at University of Tampa, where I met my Russian history professor, Dr. Stephen Spironis, the man who set the pattern for my career. And he started it. He recognized what I was and what my potential was. And he advised me, he says, Jonathan, if you are going to enter the U.S. Army being who you are, you need an equalizer. You need something to back people off. And so he advised me to take an educational delay from active service and go down to University of Miami, where I was accepted into their program. I had really high GRE scores. So University of Miami offered me a full tuition scholarship for my master's degree. You come here to University of Miami, your master's degree is on us. So I did, and into their Soviet area studies program. And my professor told me that the strategy is delay for your master's degree and your PhD. Do not enter the Army until you have completed your PhD. Then you will have a credential that no one else has. And basically it's an asymmetric response. And so I did what he said. I concentrated fully. I went at full speed through the master's degree and the PhD in 3 years. One master's degree in 1 year, PhD in another 2. And in September 1980, I entered the U.S. Army's Military Intelligence Branch as a 24-year-old first lieutenant with a PhD in Soviet area studies. They told me that not only was I the only lieutenant in the Army with a PhD, I was the only lieutenant in the Armed Forces of the United States with a PhD. And the big advantage of that was nobody ever called me a dumb lieutenant.
Well, wow. And that's, I think, in your case, almost sort of the tip of the iceberg for your resume. You've done so much.
That's the beginning.
Yeah.
And from there, I basically I taught as a Soviet threat instructor at Fort Huachuca. They said they wanted to get immediate use out of my PhD, because that's where I also published my first book, which was The Soviet View of U.S. Strategic Doctrine. That was an outgrowth of my PhD dissertation. And matter of fact, my dissertation professor, Dr. Leon Garay, he told me that when I was interested in the topic, he said, First I broached it as a term paper topic. He said it would make an even better PhD dissertation. No one has ever done it. Okay, there's my PhD on a silver platter, because the primary, and this is what it eventually became for your viewers, which is available now. The second edition, the second revised and updated edition, my wife Kathleen, who got her master's degree in diplomatic history from Georgetown, and when I met her over in Heidelberg, she was the deputy chief military historian for headquarters U.S. Army Europe. And a very formidable, and she was a very formidable, and is a very formidable intellect in her own right. She just is a absolutely voracious reader and researcher, and she helped me with building the second revised edition and updating it. We actually, some of our discussions are reflected in the appendices of that book and the predictions that we made. And that book would eventually lead to my other book, the Lockwood Analytical Method for Prediction, LAMP. And so viewers who actually look at the Russian view of U.S. strategy also get a hint or a foretaste of what I would do in the later book. But the main thing, that book there is a structured 12-step method for how to perform an intelligence prediction. And it is still regarded by the intelligence community as a classical methodology, and used in the Defense Intelligence Agency still teaches elements of what I proclaim in that book. So the central point, again, that also relies on my earlier method of studying the perceptions of our opponents. How do our opponents see us? What your viewers will gain if, for example, if they read The Russian View of U.S. Strategy, that book was published in 1993. You would think, oh, that's dated. Well, no, it isn't, because it is an original topic and it makes predictions which are coming true now. And what readers will learn from The Russian View of U.S. Strategy is how and why Vladimir Putin thinks the way he does, because he is a product of that. He is a product of the Soviet mindset. He cannot escape it. He is part of it. And so therefore, if you understand how the Russians view us, you get a clue, important clues as to what would effectively deter them from aggression. That's the Easter egg that you get out of this. And this is why I view this as very important. It has a very important bearing on the current conflict in Ukraine. One also interesting additional book that is not written by me that I would recommend to your viewers is a book that you might have heard of this. It's a New York Times bestseller by Tim Marshall called Prisoners of Geography. That is a very good book that I would recommend as an alternate reading. I would, in fact, recommend that for every American who wants to understand the problems of world geography, because Americans are notoriously bad at geography. This book would correct it because it's very well written, very easy, and it will give every American, I would recommend it all the way down to middle school because it's that well written. It gives everyone a basic understanding of the problems confronted by every leader in every region of the world. And so if you have a common understanding, then you can engage in more intelligent discussions of foreign policy problems. And you would even you start to get an understanding of what President Trump is up to.
Yes, and I think I'm beginning to follow you here just a little bit, because it seems like there's a new vision of the world that some people have, like Mr. Putin and Mr. Trump, and it looks to me like they're trying to carve it up into basically three, and correct me if I'm off track, but three major spheres of dominance for China, Russia, and the United States. Is that about on track, sort of?
That is, some other commentators have mentioned that, and what President Trump is following, in my opinion, is what I would call a strategy of asymmetric response, or what the Russians would call strategia asymmetricheskaya reagирования, if you want to wrap your tongue around that one. But that one's but President Trump has, as a major advantage of his unpredictability. Unpredictability is a very useful tool when you are trying to deter your opponents or keep them off balance. And President Trump is very good at that. Very good at that. And he is and right now the strategy that he's employing with these tariffs is another thing that it has everyone, including his allies, a little bit worried. Is this a well thought out, calculated strategy, or is President Trump merely engaging in a cosmic throw of the dice? And
if you know, please tell me, because I have no idea what is going on with this. It's insane.
He is trying to reset the economic table back in favor of the United States in shorthand, and he is basically arguing that there has been an imbalance in favor of our trade partners for a very long time, and with his tariffs, he is basically setting out to correct that and to force the other nations to respond. Now, how successful this is going to be is he's also pairing this with, as you noted, major tax cuts to stimulate economic growth and also major spending cuts. Now, in order for that to work, the spending cuts have to be at least as large as the tax cuts in order to stimulate these anticipated revenue growth in revenue, a chance to balance the budget or to help start canceling out the debt. From my standpoint, it is a calculated risk. Calculator. And he might be figuring, hey, it's my second term after me, the deluge, but like Louis the 15th. But the interesting, this is a hell of a roll of the dice. We need a new economy. Give me a 7. But this is just.
It doesn't seem like a good idea to me. Okay, I have a rudimentary knowledge of economics, and this goes against everything I was ever taught.
This is to put it charitably, an unorthodox move. I mean, it is almost like a chess player who is exploring a wild new opening that his opponent does not expect, but it could be very dangerous. You're going into it is possible in chess to go into unexplored territory with certain openings, and this would be a dilly. But in any case, But here's the central point that readers of the Russian view of U.S. strategy and from this discussion tonight can gain about what the Russians fear most. If you remember nothing else from this broadcast tonight, remember this. What the Russian military and political leadership fear more than anything else, even though they won't openly admit it or directly admit it, they fear the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing that makes them a great power in their own perception, their nuclear missile arsenals. Right. And interestingly enough, President Trump is playing right into that weakness perception, which is a potentially brilliant move. He's going for the Golden Dome, because Iron Dome that Israel has is designed to block intermediate and short-range missiles, which makes sense because of where Israel is located. With the United States, the people are implicitly recognizing, based on the Golden Dome bill, that the Golden Dome has a hole in it. That the Iron Dome has to worry about short-range and intermediate-range missiles. The United States has to worry about intercontinental missiles from Russia and China, which would come over the North Pole into low Earth orbit. And you have to be able to block those. And right now, the ballistic missile defense systems that we have, the kinetic ones, are not able to reliably intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles. And the key to intercepting intercontinental ballistic missiles is you have to be able to, based on my participation in war games dating back to the 90s and my study of war games and of space warfare, and just looking at these, the only way that you can reliably intercept intercontinental ballistic missiles is in their boost phase while they are on their way up. You can, and in the Golden Dome bill, if you take a look at, when you have a chance to take a look at it, they have $900 million allocated for space-based interceptor study. Now that's pretty interesting. So they're implicitly recognizing that the whole exists in space. In order to be able to, you have to be able to intercept from space in order to be able to reliably take out those nuclear missiles and neutralize the Russian and Chinese arsenals. The problem with that is there really are only two ways. There are two ways that you can do this. And we only know about one. I will tell you about the second tonight, and your viewers will hear this too. So the first way, the way that everyone is thinking currently, and all your other military commentators are also talking about this way, is you have to have laser weapons on satellites. Laser weapons on satellites in orbit, which will be positioned to take out those nuclear missiles. That's one way to do it. Now, based upon my participation in the 1997 Army After Next Winter War game, we experimented with that war in space problem. It was the first war in space simulated by any war game. And we looked at that, and what happened was the war games had it set up so that there were blue, the U.S. represented blue, and you had red with counterspace satellites, and you had blue with their laser satellites. So you had both sides with laser satellites in low Earth orbit. Guess what you've got? You've got a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit because you've got satellite on satellite. And the side that fires first in such a situation has a decisive advantage. Mexican standoff. If you fire first, you have an advantage, but you don't know who's going to fire first. And in the war game, red decided to fire first and gained a decisive advantage. And there were other lessons derived from that war game as well. But that was the RAND study on that was published in 1997. But the problem is that most people have forgotten that lesson. But most people don't even know about that war game in the current discussion. Most people don't know that if you put satellites in low Earth orbit, you create this Mexican standoff situation. So how do you stop a Mexican standoff from occurring in this type of situation? Well, the answer is sitting right in front, is practically sitting in plain sight. And you put the satellites on starships. What you do, the solution is you upgrade the Space Force. Right now, the U.S. Space Force consists of 80 satellites. The Russians and the Chinese look at that and they don't see a Space Force. They see a set of 80 targets. That's why they have these counterspace weapons. They are designed to take out our satellites. On the other hand, if we were to upgrade the U.S. Space Force with its own space fleet, in effect, let's say have Secretary of Defense Hegseth saying to Elon Musk and SpaceX saying, we would like to buy 12 of your Falcon 9 spacecraft, 12 of your Crew Dragons, and 12 of your Starships. And on those Starships, you would put laser weapons as well as other types of satellite reconnaissance equipment that renders our satellite constellation less vulnerable to Russian and Chinese counterspace weapons. You put those starships armed with lasers in low Earth orbit with Space Force Guardians as the crew, up to about maximum of 10, and you have a force which can effectively neutralize the nuclear missile arsenals of Russia and China. And unlike for example, if a Russian or Chinese counterspace satellite were to fire on a U.S. satellite, okay, big deal. Satellites don't have mothers. If a Russian or Chinese counterspace satellite fires on a starship, that's a clear act of war. And a U.S. Space Force starship would be authorized and able to destroy those Russian and Chinese satellites if there was any evidence of hostile action. So the real key to perfecting the Golden Dome, to sealing the potential hole in U.S. space defenses against ballistic missile attack, is in fact to upgrade the U.S. Space Force with its own space fleet that would in fact be armed, and it doesn't violate the Outer Space Treaty because we're not going to put nuclear weapons in low Earth orbit. We're going to put lasers and be able to, from there you can effectively neutralize the nuclear arsenals of Russia China, North Korea, and Iran, if they ever really decide to develop one, they would be neutralized before they're even developed. So that is an perfect example of what I call the strategy of asymmetric response. Responding in a way not directly weapon for weapon to your opponent. In this scenario, if we choose to perfect the Golden Dome, the implication of that is you don't build any more nuclear weapons. You don't need to. Your emphasis is on neutralizing the nuclear arsenals of your opponent. And if you do that, you don't need to build more nuclear weapons. You just maintain the ones you have. For example, the Biden administration, if you recall, in their latest statement, their last statement of strategy, they were talking about being prepared to engage 3 nuclear-armed adversaries. And they were recommending we have to build more nuclear weapons. Well, that's functioning under the old strategic paradigm of mutually assured destruction. Mm-hmm. That doesn't work. It doesn't have any effect on the perceptions of our adversaries if we just build more nuclear weapons. However, there has been several pieces of evidence that show if we move towards ballistic missile defense or deploy them, they are absolutely terrified of that. The Russians have been terrified, for example, of the Patriot system since 1985. Believe it or not, when I was doing research, when I was a Brigade S2 for the 10th ADA Brigade, my brigade commander came up to me and says, "Hey, Captain Lockwood, you read those Russian military journals. Why, see if you can find anything and see what the Russians are saying about Patriot." So I did. And in the January 1985 issue of Vestnik protivovosdushnoi obrony, Herald of Anti-Aircraft Defense, I found an article on U.S. medium to high altitude air defense systems. And the last third of the article talked about Patriot. And the author was talking about Patriot as if it were I'll use the Russian, protoraketnoi obrony, anti-missile defense system. In 1985, they were talking about this. Now, the amazing thing is that the Patriot did not demonstrate that it could intercept a missile until September 1987, when it test-fired and intercepted a Lance missile in Europe, showing that, yes, we have an ABM capability in the Patriot. So that's amazing. But it shows just how paranoid that the Russians were about the potential of U.S. technology. When President Reagan declared the Strategic Defense Initiative in March 1983, they were talking about, there was a book that came out, KGB, The Inside Story by Christopher Andrew and Oleg Gordievsky. Gordievsky talked about a KGB report on SDI that the KGB sent to Gorbachev in April 1985. He was saying that in that report, the KGB was telling Gorbachev that the U.S. SDI program would eventually be able to neutralize 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike. And there was no way that the Soviet Union could keep up with this capability. Now, I tell my students, okay, who of you out there believe that SDI could have intercepted 90% of Soviet missiles in a first strike? Please raise your hand. Mm-hmm. Thing is, it didn't matter. The Russians believed it, and they acted on that belief. And they practically spent themselves into bankruptcy trying to counter a phantom SDI system, which after all was simply research and development, not actual deployment. But they saw Patriot as the leading edge of Star Wars. So you can see how perception and misdirection, unintentionally worked very much in our favor. So now when you take it to the present and you have President Trump, by extension, if you have President Trump declaring this Golden Dome, you better believe that the Russians are terrified. They are terrified of the potential of American technology to neutralize the one thing that makes Russia a great power. Matter of fact, former Russian President Boris Yeltsin practically gave the game away in 1994 in a speech to the Russian Duma, where he actually was quoted as saying, "The only reason Russia is considered a great power is because its armed forces have nuclear weapons." That tells you, that reveals their psychological weakness. They believe that, and they have seen ever since, well, really the late 1950s, they have seen their nuclear weapon systems, their nuclear arsenal, as being their main way of leverage, not only a symbol of great power, but also as their means of pressuring the United States, forcing the United States to adapt to their growth of nuclear power and recognizing them as equals. So if you've noticed that Putin and the Russian leadership have been threatening the West all along with nuclear weapons. They've been brandishing this. That is why, because they see that as their primary means of leverage. That is how we will force the United States to accede to our goals. And the key to stopping them permanently is to neutralize their nuclear missile arsenals through a Golden Dome type defense. And the way you do that is you have to upgrade the Space Force. That is what, and your viewers are hearing this for the first time, because I've looked through all the discussions about Golden Dome, and no one, I mean absolutely no one, talks about upgrading the Space Force because they don't know its potential. And when you upgrade the Space Force with a space fleet, you gain several other bonus capabilities that people don't realize. What can you do with a space fleet in low Earth orbit? Name one convenient thing that a space fleet of starships could do.
Deploy more satellites.
You could actually put the satellite equipment on board the starships. Mm-hmm. And you know where the inspiration for that came? My inspiration for that came from an old classic Star Trek episode, Assignment Earth. Watch it sometime. You'll see in that episode, because the Enterprise time travels back to 68, and it shows Scotty in the transporter room monitoring the launch site. He's monitoring a launch site from the Enterprise. He's not using a satellite. He's using the Enterprise sensors that are on board the starship. Right. So we could do this in the 21st century. You have starships as part of the space fleet. You put satellite reconnaissance equipment on board the starship, and you reduce the vulnerability of the satellite. The satellite's no longer a target because it's now part of a starship. So you're monitoring and performing all those reconnaissance functions. So it becomes that's one thing. And now everyone complains about space junk. All those floating pieces of space junk. Guess what one of the ongoing missions of the U.S. Space Force Space Fleet would be?
Blasting the space junk with your lasers.
Or better yet, cleaning up, taking all that space junk on board.
Or you could do that, yeah.
Yeah, you could take it, just gather it up, take it on board, and then you transport that to a lunar base that the starships could establish on the moon, and you have a lunar junkyard where you just process all that space junk.
I'd rather shoot it with the lasers. It would be more fun.
You just create more space junk that way. It gets counterproductive. And then another thing that Neil deGrasse Tyson, when he was on with Stephen Colbert, and Colbert was trying to criticize President Trump's creation of the Space Force. And Tyson said that, just because an idea comes out of President Trump's mouth, that doesn't make it a dumb idea. He pointed out that Space Force, with a space fleet, it could be very useful in blocking, deflecting, or destroying near-Earth objects such as asteroids, meteors, or comets. That's a very useful function for a Space Force. As a matter of fact, a very necessary one. So as I say, when you create a space fleet, you gain not just the ability to perfect the Golden Dome and neutralize nuclear weapons, but you gain additional bonus capabilities, which most people do not realize. And that is why I would urge your listeners to start pestering your congressman and say, hey, or forwarding this program, forwarding this link and saying, this is an idea whose time has come. This is the idea. We need to upgrade the Space Force and create a space fleet, which, by the way, would be a heck of a lot cheaper than other options because we don't have to invent new spacecraft. We've got them. SpaceX has them. Any spacecraft that are supposedly designed to go to Mars or go to the moon can easily perform all of the functions you would want to have in a space fleet in near-Earth orbit. It's just a natural thing. And they're doing all the testing for us. It's not a separate project. So once they perfect those things, then we are able to buy the space fleet, put it in action, and we can do it faster than any other nation. No other nation is prepared to deploy a space fleet in the way that we are able to deploy a space fleet. And key to that, of course, is going to be you have to cut expenses. You have to cut military expenses and adopt a new strategy of asymmetric response. What is the role of the U.S. Army in this new strategy? What is the role of the Space Force role expands greatly. The Navy still retains its traditional mission of global naval dominance, because that's how we, affect world trade and do it and maintain our other. So we have to have sea supremacy and space supremacy. Air power and land power become somewhat less important, particularly in President Trump's view, because where he seems to be going is, best way to illustrate this, he is trying to make the U.S. the geopolitical balancer, in much the same way that Great Britain was the geopolitical balancer with respect to the continent of Europe in the 18th and 19th centuries. So in this case, President Trump could be the balancer. Matter of fact, if your viewers wanted to have a really interesting way to play this out, you might ever heard of the board game Risk?
Mm.
Yeah,
Yes.
They call that everybody's first war game. That's a classic. And I can tell your listeners, you get a game of Risk. And in order to get an idea of what President Trump is trying to accomplish, you can play what I call the Trump scenario. And this is how you play it. You have, of course, 6 continents in the game of Risk. You can have up to 6 players. To play the Trump scenario, you give each player control of one continent. And of course, President Trump, or I'll call him the Trump player, has control of North America, which includes, by the way, Greenland, Central America. How
Great.
convenient.
Okay.
How convenient. That's the Trump player. And so you have these 6 players, and they set up their normal number of armies. I think it's 20 armies each, allocated however they wish. And you give the Trump player the first move. But everyone has to deploy and conduct their diplomacy. And then you see how that is perhaps a bit oversimplified, but a very simple way to illustrate the geopolitical thinking that President Trump is engaging in, at least indirectly. You get an idea of it. You take that plus reading that book, Prisoners of Geography, and and your listeners will have a much more complete understanding of what President Trump is really up to. That's my contention.
Well, you seem very excited about all of this, and I can understand why.
I'm excited about its potential.
Yeah.
Because now I will caution says it does not. Doing this type of strategy will not solve the problem of war. It will not resolve the problems of human conflict. What it will do is it will remove the threat of global thermonuclear war or global nuclear war. It takes it off the table and makes disarm. It solves one aspect of the problem, and that all by itself is a worthwhile achievement, because you cannot. It's like that one advertisement for the. You remember the UN organization called Save the Children?
Yeah.
Yes. And I love their motto: you can't save the whole world, but you can save a piece of it. And
yet, with all of this, it seems like things are being destabilized. I've been thinking that the reason we're seeing this destabilization is because of more countries getting and pursuing nuclear weapons, and also because of technology affecting the balance of power. Yep. And this push toward a new multipolar geopolitical reality. All of this coming into play, and all very, very well. It's just leading us into a very dangerous period.
Yes, it is. It's not going to be tranquil. However, my contention is that the one thing that the U.S. has under its control is its ability, with its technology properly applied and with proper political decisions, to engage in a strategy of asymmetric response, which with the aim of making the United States the geopolitical balancer, not trying to be the world policeman, the balancer, being able to oppose nations which threaten to try to dominate the world island or a particular continents. If you can block them from doing that, that is about the best you can do in such a highly unstable situation. And if you can neutralize the effectiveness of nuclear weapons through creating what I advocated in the book, Russian View U.S. Strategy, I advocated the creation of the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix, WSDM, acronym WISDOM. And that's what I advocate currently. You perfect the Golden Dome by creating WISDOM, the Worldwide Strategic Defense Matrix, which has as its aim the neutralization of nuclear weapons through the Space Force and the Golden Dome. And if you can neutralize these nuclear weapons, you can work towards disarming nuclear weapons, which President Trump says he also wants to do. He says he wants to get rid of nuclear weapons. Well, fine. If you want to do that, you have to make them obsolete and impotent, the way President Reagan wanted to do with Star Wars. So you do that through perfecting the Golden Dome, through upgrading the Space Force. These are steps which no one else, again, I say no one else is talking about right now. I talked about it on the Ukraine show and the implications of that strategy. And sometimes I gotta tell you, Rick, I feel like a lone prophet crying in the wilderness because right now I'm just about the only one talking about this and advocating this sort of thing, because it is truly an asymmetric, nonconformist response. But it is something that I would highly recommend that your viewers think about. And by the way, that Russian View of U.S. Strategy book, it is also available in ebook format, just in case the publisher gets caught short and they can't print enough copies or whatever. But what that book does, it will give your viewers a unique perspective, which not too many other people fully account for.
Yes, and that is available on Amazon.
Yes, it is. Yeah, they do. Amazon does, to its credit, does regularly maintain and have copies available. And they can also look for, if they don't happen to have enough in stock, you could go to Taylor and Francis, which is Taylor and Francis is the publishing company that currently publishes my book, and request, hey, we need more books, that sort of thing. But also, worst case, you can simply look for ebooks. Look for it in ebook format. It is published in that format now. So, but it will give you an understanding of how the Russians think and why they think that way.
And can you just give us a very brief Reader's Digest version of why Russians think the way they do, or maybe more specifically, why Putin thinks the way he does? Why did he invade Ukraine?
Well, again, why
won't he stop?
Why won't he stop? Because, now, for one thing, he sees himself as the restorer of the Russian Empire. He sees himself as being able to. He thought that the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the great geopolitical disasters of the 20th century. And Henry Kissinger, and we talk about this in our book at the beginning, Henry Kissinger, back in the early 1990s, warned of the potential reemergence of Russia. Don't think that the collapse of the Soviet Union means that Russia is no longer going to be a problem. He said eventually they would recover and reassert themselves, and he was correct. And so that is what Russia is trying to do now. The war between Russia and Ukraine is the clash of two politically irreconcilable objectives. The Russians want to restore the Russian Empire. The Ukrainians want independence and have nothing to do with the Russian Empire. And the Russians and Ukrainians have been at each other's throats in one way or another for over a century. And if you doubt the resolve of the Ukrainians to resist Russia, during World War II, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, the Ukrainians at first welcomed the Nazis as liberators. And they were willing to join with Nazi Germany and form a separate state, allied with Nazi Germany. And of course, then the Nazis started doing things like, exterminating the Ukrainians as Untermenschen, and using their ashes to fertilize the cabbage fields. that shocked the Ukrainians into say, oh, the Nazis are just as bad, if not worse, than the Russians. And the Ukrainians began opposing both the Nazis and the Soviets. And when the Soviet army came back through Ukraine, they continued to resist Soviet occupation, and they engaged in guerrilla warfare against the occupying Soviet forces in a guerrilla movement which was not fully suppressed until 1954, which was not well known or advertised in the West. But the Ukrainians absolutely will not accept. As a matter of fact, currently they've said that they want the Russians out. Yeah. And fortunately, now here's another factor. The European Union has said that their condition for lifting the sanctions against Russia is that Russians must withdraw from all occupied Ukrainian territory, including the Crimea, which the Russians aren't about to do, which means the EU is going to continue to impose sanctions. And President Trump has said, if the Russians won't agree to a ceasefire, he'll impose sanctions. So there's another line in the sand, but Putin is in too deep to quit from his perspective. He cannot afford to quit. If he does, he then has to confront his own people and his own leadership and say, okay, Vladimir, you've wasted 1 million Russian lives and wrecked our economy for what?
Right.
And his life may not be worth a plug nickel as if he stops the war. It's like he's climbed on the back of a tiger that he's riding. He can't afford to. It's dangerous for him to ride the tiger. It's even more dangerous for him to get off.
Yes, and for a special military operation, as he calls it, that was supposed to be over in
a few days,
number of days or a week, it's turned into 3 years plus.
One of the most difficult things as an intelligence analyst is to predict when your enemy is about to do something stupid. Because you always assume as an intelligence analyst that your opponent is behaving rationally and logically. And you're trying to figure out the most logical thing for him to, well, doing something stupid or irrational is not an easy thing to do. So this is a very, again, so Putin, he puts a great deal of faith in his nuclear arsenal as the means of leverage. That's why they've been threatening escalation. But they don't have the political will to roll the dice and in effect unleash a nuclear attack. Because again, what's very interesting about this, the Russians in the 1960s, in their Soviet Officers Library series, they had a little book called The Offensive by Colonel Sidorenko, which talked about nuclear weapons, why the nuclear weapons are part of Soviet offensive doctrine. They were talking about things like massed nuclear weapons fire along multiple axes of advance. So, whoa! As it turns out, the Warsaw Pact war plans, which were discovered at the end of the Cold War when East Germany collapsed and West Germany went in there, and they found the Warsaw Pact's war plans. And those war plans called for the use of as many as 300 nuclear weapons against NATO forces in the initial stages of the war. And the plan was literally blast a hole in NATO's lines and then drive through for the English Channel coast. So wow. There's a problem. Wow, that sounds pretty impressive. We dodged a bullet, right? Yeah. Well, there's a problem. There's a problem with using a mass nuclear weapons fire or blasting a hole. Colonel Sidorenko was claiming that during World War II, that high rates of artillery fire resulted in high rates of Russian advance. Well, he conveniently overlooked a certain fact, is that during World War II, the Russian logistics system, how they supply their troops, what that was largely based on? Horse-drawn wagons, not trucks. They didn't have them until the United States began supplying through Lend-Lease those Ford trucks. Yep. That enabled the Soviet army to have a motorized logistics system. That gave them the ability to drive Nazi Germany out of the Soviet Union because they had a motorized logistics system, not a horse-drawn wagon one. if the United States had not supplied them with those types of things, the Soviet army still would have defeated the German armies and inflicted a great deal of casualties, but they would have been very hard pressed to drive the German armies out of the Soviet Union. They would not have had the logistical capability to do it. So that's why I'm skeptical of their faith in their nuclear weapon system. Okay, yeah, you blast a hole in the Ukrainian lines or NATO's lines, but they don't have the logistics system to exploit it. There's nothing to draw. You blast a hole, and that's all you've done. So there's certain things. That's why I take their threats to use their nuclear weapons with a very large grain of salt. They don't have the logistics to exploit it.
And it's a double-edged sword even for them, because you have fallout and radioactivity, and their troops would be exposed to all of that, and maybe their population, depending on which way the wind is blowing. So it's a very dangerous.
It would be a very big roll of the dice for them.
Yeah.
And so, that's why it's all the more imperative for the United States and NATO, because, for example, this worldwide strategic defense matrix, if the United States can construct that kind of a system, they could extend that shield over its NATO allies and over Ukraine and protect them from nuclear attack. That is the big advantage of upgrading the Space Force. Again, they don't talk about upgrading the Space Force right now because they don't think in those terms. But thanks to the research and analysis that I've been able to do over the past several decades and my unique experience in these types of war games, is that I've been able to gain certain insights that can be very valuable to the current discussion. And that is why I hope that your listeners will seize the initiative on their own and say, hey, let's get this to their congressman, get it to the people in Congress who are advocating the Golden Dome. Say, here's something you haven't thought about that you need to think about that we can do. Because the one great secret in all of this is that this kind of thing is possible.
And the other work that you've done here with this analytical method for prediction.
LAMP,
yeah, and I found this online, which gives sort of a brief overview. It's a step-by-step method for predicting the future using intelligence, data, information.
Right.
Can you explain this further?
Yeah. Basically, originally I developed this as a result of my being a DCI exceptional intelligence analyst in 1992 and 1993. And my project was to analyze the perceptions of the nuclear republics of the former Soviet Union, Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan. They each had a portion of the former Soviet nuclear arsenal. And my project was to analyze their perceptions of this issue and try to predict what would be the most likely outcome. And so I realized when I started this project that I had to develop an entirely new methodology, because there was no analytical methodology that was adequate to the task of analyzing this kind of a problem. So what LAMP does, essentially, is it creates a very structured process. It takes the analyst through step by step, which is very attractive, by the way, to my military students, because they love order and structure. And say, oh, great, just plug my analysis into all of this. Unfortunately, one of the big mistakes that my students made, and I had to correct them on this, when they would brief their results, some of them would make the mistake of saying, the LAMP method concluded. No. The LAMP method didn't conclude anything. No method will do your thinking for you. You made that conclusion. All the LAMP method does is it provides structure and order and renders your thinking transparent to an outside observer. Any reader in Congress, in the intelligence community, that looks at your analysis using the LAMP method can easily see then how you got from point A to point B in drawing your conclusion. This makes it superior to a lot of analyses that take place in the intelligence community in what I call black box analysis. You see all this discussion going on in the paper, and all of a sudden, poof, the conclusion appears. How the hell did they get to that conclusion? That's black box. You can't see the process by which the analyst is drawing his or her conclusion. LAMP corrects that problem, makes your thinking transparent.
Right.
And so you can apply it to, but LAMP is not designed for every intelligence problem. I point out in the book that there are certain situations in which you will not use the LAMP. LAMP is designed for multiple actors with multiple courses of action. If you have just one actor, you would not use LAMP. You would use a method such as analysis of competing hypotheses, which is a very good method when you're faced with a single actor and trying to predict that. And there are other methods, and I point them out in the book as well and compare LAMP with other analytical methods. So I give room to other methods, and LAMP happens to play very well with other analytic methods. You can combine the LAMP with other analytic methods and come up with a superior analysis. So that is a very useful tool for either someone who is currently an intelligence analyst or someone who wants to become an intelligence analyst in the future.
And so this is you're defining the issue.
Yes.
And then you're specifying who the national actors are that involved. So it could be Russia, Ukraine.
Yeah.
And
you could do a LAMP analysis of Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah.
What are their future courses of action? What are the scenarios that arise from it? And it takes you through and it allows you to draw, in effect, an analytic map into the future. And then it will not tell you what it will be able to tell you what the most likely future is at that moment in time.
And in fact, from what I've read there, it gives you multiple possibilities, not just one, and then you can assess and
you do a pairwise comparison, and it tells you from most likely to least likely.
Yes. And
recognize that it can change as you get more information.
Okay, let's take a brief break, and then we'll come back on the other side, and we'll apply maybe some of that thinking and analysis to what's going on in Ukraine. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back on the other side of this.
Maverick News. The world is watching.
Up. Need your sound on again. Dang, 21st century technology. Why can't we get to Star Trek?
Thanks for letting me know. Sometimes I just sit here for 10 minutes and do this and nobody can hear me.
Otherwise we'll be doing finger puppets if we're
That's right. Sign language.
Yeah.
So this help us out here, because this method that you've had, well, hopefully this can give us a bit of a crystal ball into where you think things are going in Ukraine. And I think where things are very unpredictable right now. Now that President Trump is back.
I've been following the situation very closely based upon my experience in wargaming, I will tell you, by the way, what I think is the true center of gravity in this Russian-Ukrainian war. And again, you notice that the Ukrainians are engaging in counteroffensives, limited counteroffensives along the Eastern Front, which are very good. And they are seeing that the Russians are reaching what Clausewitz called the culminating point. Clausewitz talked of a culminating point in an offensive. This is where the attacker has essentially reached the pinnacle of what they can achieve with their attack. And at that point, this allows the defender to counterattack and potentially drive back the attacker. So the Russians are very rapidly approaching their culminating point where they can no longer continue the offensive. And the Ukrainians have been gaining strength. They're getting stronger and have been mobilizing their reserves, and they're expanding their forces. And they have an opportunity, as I continue on the Ukraine show, they have an opportunity to inflict a decisive operational defeat on the Russian forces at the true center of gravity of this conflict. The true center of gravity, the decisive battle in this war is the Crimea. That is the true center of gravity. If the Ukrainians are able to isolate the Russian occupying forces in Crimea, cut them off from supply and reinforcement, which they are very close to doing. If they are able to do that, that renders the Russian occupation forces in Crimea helpless. This then allows the Ukrainians to, with their strategic reserves, if they have managed to form new units with their increased mobilization and restructuring and gaining of new weapons, if they can then have this force that can counterattack into Crimea against an isolated and unsupplied Russian occupation force, this could force the Russians in Crimea to surrender. And you then Crimea becomes liberated and back under Ukrainian control, and that becomes an operational defeat that the Russians cannot explain away. They can't hide it, and it provides a decisive basis for the Ukrainians and the Russians to, okay, now it's time for a ceasefire. Now it's because the best that the Russians could do at that point is to get an armistice, not a peace. It would be something very similar to what currently exists between North and South Korea for 75 years.
And that's why they need to take out that bridge. Yeah,
they need to take out that bridge to take out that bridge that is the resupply point. They've been damaging it. They have the technology to, at the right time, to take out that bridge and cut off the supplies. They do that, Crimea becomes very vulnerable to a Ukrainian counteroffensive, which will retake the Crimea and force the Russians to capitulate and yield back the Crimea to Ukraine, which and Ukrainians have already said they will not recognize the permanent loss of Crimea or the eastern Ukrainian lands to Russia. That's a non-starter for them. So the war is effectively going to continue until the Russians exhaust themselves, and Putin has no choice. He has to continue because if he accedes to peace. By the way, the Russians have no word for compromise. Well, they used to have no word at all for compromise. They instead took the English word for compromise and it gave it Cyrillic letters and so forth. And their translation of compromise is much different from our translation of compromise. When we talk of compromise, what do you think? What is a compromise?
Meeting somebody halfway.
Giving
a little something up.
Yeah. And what's the implication of compromise, of that interpretation of compromise? Both sides gain something.
Right.
Yeah, meaning both sides. The Russian translation of compromise is mutual surrender. Both sides lose. That's a very negative, but that's the Russian interpretation of compromise. Both sides lose something. To the Russians, compromise is distasteful. It's like, they don't want to be seen as compromising. Their concept is kto kogo, whom, who is superior to whom, who dominates whom. In Russian culture and Russian society, you are either someone's superior or you are their inferior. You are never their equal. Equality is a very transient state until the eventual relationship of superior to inferior can be established. That's a very different way of looking at it.
This really is a war of ideas, and it seems like the political ideologies in play here stem really from a foundation of that very idea that you're articulating now,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
You know, the ideas of Western Enlightenment, individualism, freedom versus this other
Well,
ideology, way of thinking. It's a different way of looking at the world.
Winston Churchill, back when he wrote his multi-volume series, and he pointed out that that the one thing that the Russians have respect more, Russians will respect nothing more, anything else more than strength, and there is nothing that they have more contempt for than weakness, particularly military weakness. And he recognized that back in the early 20th century, and that perception has carried over into the present, into the 21st century. So it's that, and again, when you read Prisoners of Geography, you will see, Tim Marshall points out that Russian leaders have always had this problem of having to the Russians have a word for their word for security, for example. Their word for security is bezopasnost, which means without danger. That's an absolute concept of security. In order for the Russians to feel secure, their neighbors must be made to feel insecure and even subordinate, if not totally subservient to Russia. That is their idea of security. They must be surrounded by subservient, weak states.
So is that what gives, like, is that where this whole NATO expansionism being used as the crutch or the excuse for the invasion, is that where that stems from?
In part, recall at the end of the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, when it disintegrated, its Warsaw Pact allies, so to speak, they all wanted to become part of NATO because they recognized what the Soviet Union and Russia was. They wanted no part of it. They wanted to become part of NATO almost by default because they recognized, and remember, those same states, they knew the Warsaw Pact's war plans. They knew what Russia would want to do, use nuclear weapons to get their empire back. So it's no surprise to me that all those former Warsaw Pact allies wanted to join NATO, and a number of them wanted to have nuclear weapons stationed on their territory, and also ballistic missile defense systems stationed on their territory, because they knew that Russia would use its nuclear arsenal if necessary to retake those territories. So this is why, what Russia claims to be NATO expansionism is in reality its former allies wanting to have no part of Russia, instead become part of NATO. NATO expanded despite itself.
Yeah, in fact, reluctantly.
They reluctantly expanded and had to incorporate them because expansion of NATO provides its own unique problems. You have to standardize all those weapon systems and convert from the former Warsaw Pact equipment and logistics and so forth and get them to NATO standards, which takes a long time. It takes years to get them fully integrated into that kind of system.
Yes. And I understand why he says that they want to join NATO so that they don't have to put nuclear weapons back into Ukraine to defend themselves. I understand that logic entirely. Of course, on the Russian side, they've spun that up, saying that Zelensky wants to get nukes, but I think it's kind of the opposite.
The Ukrainians back in 1994, again, I analyzed this during my project. In my article on Ukraine, the aspiring nuclear power, I pointed out that Ukraine wanted to have nuclear weapons as a guarantee against Russian invasion. And my conclusion at the end of that article, not too long before the U.S. had that Budapest agreement, to which forced Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons, I pointed out that without barring decisive intervention by the West, that we would eventually be confronted with the Scylla and Charybdis, that in the Odyssey, the Scylla of increased nuclear proliferation. You have to choose that, or the Charybdis of a Russian-Ukrainian war.
And here we are.
Guess what we got? We got the Russian-Ukrainian war. We gave them forced them to give up nuclear weapons, but now we're confronted with the Russian-Ukrainian war that we wanted to avoid. So now that technology has progressed to the point, and ballistic missile defense in particular has progressed to the point where we have the potential to form a shield against this type of aggression, to neutralize those nuclear missile arsenals. And again, key to this will be, the Golden Dome project that President Trump has proposed does in fact fit very well into all of this. But you have to reallocate defense spending. You have to engage in a major revision of strategy, which is still in progress. The bill calls for, as I said, calls for a study of space-based interceptors. I'm tempted to call them up and say, hey guys, I can save you $900 million. Got this. Let's just do this solution, upgrade the Space Force. But your listeners should read that Golden Dome bill. It's available. You can look at it. And also look at the U.S. Space Force, and also look at SpaceX, what its spacecraft that they have. Those spacecraft fit very well into the specific what would be needed for a Space Force fleet. You don't have to design an entirely new fleet. It's there. And as a matter of fact, the historical analogy that I would use for your listeners, remember back in World War I, when there were several technological developments during World War I that appeared to be very promising, but they were in isolation. They were not fully developed or integrated into any other type of strategy. These innovations were the tank, the airplane, radio communications, and on the German side, the Germans, prior to their 1918 Kaiserschlacht offensive, they developed infiltration tactics. So you take those four developments. Then after World War I, the Germans, in their reduced army, they began studying these innovations, and they integrated them into a new doctrine, which would eventually become known to the world as Blitzkrieg. They tested out that doctrine in the Spanish Civil War of 1937. And only a very few people in the West recognized what was coming. And fortunately, they were able to plan for it. But the Germans were able to take those isolated technological achievements and integrate them into a new form of warfare. In the same way, on the ballistic missile defense side, we have technological developments which by themselves look promising, but you need to integrate them into a new kind of strategy, which forms the worldwide strategic defense matrix, WISDOM. In effect, I'm advocating a paradigm shift from mutually assured destruction, MAD, to WISDOM, worldwide strategic defense matrix.
I like your word better. Sounds much more promising.
You know what my motto for WISDOM is? Yeah, basically, wisdom does not kill. It doesn't. Yeah, because its primary function is to neutralize nuclear ballistic missiles. It does not kill anything except ballistic missiles. And because it does that, it opens up other possibilities for at least moderating the violence of warfare, at least taking global nuclear war off the table.
And yet, strangely, I think nuclear weapons gave us something of a peace for 70, 80 years.
It prevented, one could make the argument that it prevented the onset of the Third World War in Europe that would have occurred, could well have occurred. And there is that. But now that you have other nuclear powers trying to acquire nuclear weapons, now it becomes necessary to neutralize nuclear ballistic missiles as weapons of warfare.
Yes.
And the only way you can do that is by taking technology to another level, creating a worldwide strategic defense matrix, which our NATO allies could be partners in. There's nothing that prevents them from doing that. And so there are a number of very useful possibilities for the worldwide strategic defense matrix. And that's why I started to advocate in my book, The Russian View of U.S. Strategy. But privately, I put it on hold because in my subsequent experiences in that war game, creating that hair trigger situation in space, how do you resolve that Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit? Well, the answer to that would not emerge until Elon Musk developed reusable spacecraft. And that created the possibility of creating a space fleet, which could house the necessary weapons required to neutralize ballistic missiles.
But all of this is going to take time, and I don't know if Ukraine has that much time on their side. So what does your crystal ball tell you about where this conflict in Ukraine is going?
What it tells me right now is that because the current alignment of political forces is favoring Ukraine, you have the sanctions being applied on Russia, you have steady pressure being applied on their economy. President Trump is obviously fully prepared to drill, baby, drill, and drop the price of oil even further, and depending on what other factors he brings into play, which will steadily reduce Russia's ability to wage war, to prosecute an offensive of sufficient force to compel Ukraine's surrender. Ukraine's power, on the other hand, is growing steadily. They are gaining better weapons. They're gaining allies. All of its European allies. They read history very well. They remember. They remember World War II. They remember these historic lessons better than Americans do.
Is what you're saying actually true? Because I think a lot of the people in our audience are getting a heavy daily dose of information or maybe propaganda. You can assess it any way you want, indicating to them that Ukraine is weakening. They don't have enough manpower, that it's a war of attrition. And the longer it goes on, the more Russia has the upper hand, and this is why Putin isn't quitting, because he has no reason to, and Ukraine should just give up in order to save itself, which is a strange way of looking at it. But
and that to the Ukrainians is completely unacceptable. It's simply ceasing to resist Russia. That is part of the propaganda line, and what the factors that I see of Russia's casualty rates, they're still going up. Russia calling up more conscripts, that doesn't mean they're going to get higher quality troops. Mm-hmm. They've already blown through those.
Yeah, they're calling up 160,000 more right now.
That's 160,000 more cannon fodder. Mm-hmm. And these are liable to be Russians who are much closer to ethnic Russians that they've blown through the non-ethnic Russians. So this is not going to be good for Vladimir Putin. And that the Ukrainians they have lowered their mobilization, they have lowered their recruitment age to 18, and they've expanded their manpower pool to a point where Russia will no longer have any kind of significant advantage. And if the and you'll notice with their logistical system that I pointed out earlier, remember in World War II, they had those horse-drawn wagons? Yeah. Well, currently they've got donkeys carrying supplies. So that means that their logistical system is extremely weak and unreliable and unable to sustain a powerful enough offensive to force any kind of superior casualties on the Ukrainians.
And that's because so much of their machinery has been destroyed, right?
Correct. Their machinery has been destroyed. Their supply infrastructure has been heavily damaged. And So their capability for sustaining warfare, for sustaining mobile warfare, is steadily decreasing, and the more steadily decreases, the more they are forced to rely on infantry attacks. Those infantry attacks sustained very high casualties, which they can sustain it for a while, but it's not going to force the Ukrainians to surrender. And again, if Ukraine, in my projection, discovers the opportunity to inflict that decisive counterattack in the Crimea, which I contend is the true center of gravity of this war, if they do that and inflict a decisive defeat, that not only takes out a major Russian base, it takes out their Russian naval base. Yeah, they're capable of sustaining operations in the Black Sea, and it just it does a number of things that heavily favor Ukraine. And at that point, the Russians would be well advised to call it a day, declare victory, and go home.
Right. Yeah. And it would be a massive PR blow on the home front for Vladimir Putin.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
He's not going to be able to explain that away very easily. I don't care how much he lies.
Yeah. So is Trump getting tired of Putin? Is that what we're...
Well, Trump is getting really pissed off at Putin.
Yeah, is that real? That's not
that's not fake, because President Trump prides himself, justifiably in many cases, of being able to work a deal. He wrote the book, The Art of the Deal, and so he believes, many believe, that he is a very transactional president, that he believes in being able to make a suitable deal, and what he is not used to is an opponent like Russia, which does not believe in deal making, which does not believe in compromise. And so he and his advisors are being confronted by this intransigent opponent that will not make a deal, that instead tries to impose maximalist demands, demanding in effect, the equivalent of unconditional surrender. And I said, what? And so that's going to make President Trump angry, and not irrational angry, but angry in the sense of, President Trump did say to Putin, "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." And apparently, President Putin is going to convince President Trump that, well, guess you need to do it the hard way. And that is, and in effect, what it's going to mean to President Trump is that he has to raise the price of continuing the war for Russia. He has to raise that price so high that the price of making peace is visibly less than continuing the war. That's how it would work in President Trump's calculation. He's got to raise the cost.
And we have seen in the last even couple of days, Russia in a more direct way saying that the ceasefire deal is not acceptable. So this energy infrastructure ceasefire, it was really never in place. I don't think that Russia was ever honoring that, and it's just disingenuous, the things they were saying from the beginning.
Right, and now when here's an interesting historical analogy. Remember Jimmy Carter, when he first came into office? He was lecturing. He was taking a very accommodating attitude towards the Soviet Union. He was talking about how we had this inordinate fear of communism, and that was the early part of his administration. Then came the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and Jimmy Carter's eyes were opened. He was made to recognize the true nature of the threat that confronted him. And what did he do? He imposed the grain embargo on the Soviet Union. He boycotted the Moscow Olympics. And he began supplying the Afghanistan resistance with weapons. And in addition to that, something which is not commonly recognized by his Americans, he began the accelerated defense buildup, the large-scale buildup in force in funding, which all Ronald Reagan had to do when he came into office is step on the accelerator. Just continue that offensive buildup. But Jimmy Carter started it, And my personal experience, by the way, with that was when I came on active duty in September 1980. And I was going to get my first pay raise as a first lieutenant. Woo! It was announced that on October 1st, all members of the U.S. Armed Forces were getting an 11.1% pay raise. That huge. And then we started getting, and then President Reagan continued on similar pay raises, after that, but 11.1%, that was just a small part of the overall defense buildup that was going on. Because, during that period of the 80s, you could ask for just about anything and get it. Because it was just, the purse strings were opened. So that situation does not exist now, but it could with a proper reorientation of strategy. We can do it in selected areas. If, for example, we chose with my proposed building up of the U.S. Space Force, stop building nuclear weapons, divert all that funding, instead just maintain the ones you've got, divert that funding for nuclear weapons to building the worldwide strategic defense matrix, upgrading the U.S. Space Force, reduce the size of the U.S. Army, because Hegseth wants to create a more physically fit force. He wants reinstill a warrior culture. He's not advocating greater numbers. He wants higher technology forces. So if you could basically reduce the size of the U.S. Army by emphasizing a higher quality force, because that's the force you need the least numbers in. You need a good-sized U.S. Navy. You need a decent-sized U.S. Air Force. In the U.S. Space Force, you don't need that many people, although it would be still significantly larger than it is right now. But you rebalance the forces in that way, and you have a fundamentally different strategic situation.
We need more drones and robots.
Oh, you better believe it. The Ukrainians are teaching us a very valuable lesson about drones. And robots. Robots. They'd be able to use robots. The Ukrainians launched an offensive against the Russians using nothing but robots, airborne and ground drones. It looked like something out of Terminator, 1984. Yeah. Robots against humans. And so it's just absolutely, the Ukrainians can teach the United States an awful lot about warfare and its emerging lessons. And the Ukrainians are very inventive.
Which is one main reason we should make sure we're on their side at the end of this conflict, because if they end up in the Russian camp, then we'll be.
That's why Russia.
We don't want to be fighting them.
No. They want Ukrainians' military industrial infrastructure. That's why they want all of Ukraine, and Ukraine realizes that, and that's why they are determined to resist Russia, and why the Europeans, because ideally, if Ukraine succeeds in driving Russia out of Ukraine and in effect becoming a de facto, if not an actual legal part of NATO, Ukraine becomes the eastern bulwark of NATO against future Russian aggression. And it would be in the interest of all of Europe to aid Ukraine in economic reconstruction and military power. So it's very much in their interest to do that.
Speaking of NATO, there was this big NATO meeting today, and I see that Marco Rubio had a news conference with Mark Rutte of NATO, and Marco Rubio said today that the United States is absolutely going to stay inside NATO and be part of NATO, which
that's good news.
Be very reassuring to a lot of people. Is that? Do you think that's actually true? Because a lot of people have been very worried.
It can become even more true because once the United States leadership recognizes the potential that an upgraded Space Force and upgraded ballistic missile defense and the perfecting of the Golden Dome, which is quite possible, because people are just thinking in terms of space-based interceptors with satellites. As we've discussed, there is a component which they are not even thinking about, the upgrading of a U.S. Space Force to complete and perfect to the Golden Dome. But no one thinks in those terms yet.
Right.
And that is what I would urge your listeners to pepper their congress people and senators and say, hey, and send them this link to this show and talk about, hey, you need to think in a new way. You need to think asymmetrically. You need to think of a way to throw your opponents off balance with superior strategy. That is how you do it.
Well, as dark as this subject is, I think that you have shed a little bit of light and maybe some
Optimism?
fresh hope and, yes, positivity on things here tonight. So I thank you for that, because I'm feeling a little bit more relieved and optimistic. Yeah, absolutely. Colonel, is there anything more tonight that you'd like to add? Absolutely have to have you back on the program, because
Oh,
I think we've just barely scratched the surface on a lot of this, and the Ukraine conflict is ongoing.
I think we've got an excellent start here tonight, and I've shown you and your listeners the outlines of the strategy and the events in my life that have led me to formulate my system of strategic thought and intelligence analysis. And I would urge your listeners, check out the books that I publish, because I am thinking in terms of, there are three things that I am thinking of. One, I'm thinking of an updated version of that, the Russian view of U.S. strategy. My wife has been urging me to, publish an updated version of that, which would incorporate the post-Cold War period. The conclusions would be pretty much the same, and again, this one and that one, the Lockwood analytical method for prediction, that one can still be used by itself the way it currently exists. It was published in 2013, but there are also, if it were to be published in future editions, it would be if, for example, if I got a bunch of users who started publishing LAMP papers or LAMP chapters or predictions that I could incorporate into a revised and updated edition. There is the potential for that. The third book that I would be looking at publishing would be, right now, the working title for my the third book would be Space Power, Theory and Practice in the 21st Century. Basically, I'm taking some of the ideas that I have mentioned this evening and showing how space power would be a new source of strategic power and strength for the United States, and very useful for the world in general, and how space power would actually emerge. Right now, the Space Force does not have a fully developed space power theory. I mean, they have space operations and things like that, but there's not much space power thinking that you can do when you only have a force of 80 satellites. You're not going to be doing much war fighting with 80 satellites. I'm sorry. That's just posturing. You need a space fleet for that. You need a space fleet with specific weapons and specific missions to carry out, for not only just for United States defense, but for planetary defense, such as blocking asteroids, meteors, and comets, things like that. So there is much that can be done, and much that I would like to discuss in future programs. Sure.
Yeah. And just finally, you do the Ukraine show.
Yes.
And I did have this link, and it just brings me to this. Is this where people go to see it?
Pod TV. Yes. Yeah, Pod TV. And I sent you the email address of my producer, Mark Lee. And you might want to distribute that, make that address available to your users so that he in turn can send you back the link, which takes them into StreamYard, which is where my program that I appear on with Sasha Starr. And sometimes we have Ivan Kirichenko, who is based in Kiev, Ukraine. And the three of us discuss on Tuesday the situation in Ukraine. And tomorrow there's Sasha. That's the one. That's the guy. He and I are going to be talking about the Ukraine situation tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
Okay. Sasha Starr at 11 a.m.
Yes, that's the guy.
Okay. And if they go to Pod TV, they can...
There are a variety of other shows that Pod TV offers, and including a show on chess, which Sasha also hosts a show on chess.
Okay.
Very much a chess enthusiast.
Okay. And are you on like YouTube, any other platforms? I wasn't able to find you there, but...
Yeah, well, again, the only program that I appear on that can be accessed on YouTube is, in fact, the Ukraine show, which is available on YouTube, past programs going all the way back to August 2022. So there are, again, and I have tended to maintain a relatively low profile. That may change, starting with this show and other shows on which I may appear, discussing these same ideas. Because, like I said, I'm the only person in the world who is discussing upgrading the Space Force. The reaction of the world is going to say, "What?" Because and one of my colleagues that reviewed my briefing on this, he says, "You're advocating bringing Star Trek into the 21st century." Yes, I am.
Yes, you are. Absolutely. Power up those phasers.
Power, or at least the lasers. We'll start with lasers.
Yes.
And we'll start with lasers and chemically powered starships, and we'll upgrade those starships with nuclear thermal propulsion engines. That makes them more cost effective and less expensive to maintain. And then eventually, there you go.
I'm ready to go.
And eventually what you want to do is when we perfect fusion power, you imagine fusion-powered starships. Fusion-powered starships put the entire solar system within easy reach.
And we have that technology being developed right now.
It is on the verge of becoming very usable because we're getting more energy out of the nuclear fusion reaction that it takes to put into it to start it.
Yeah.
Once you get usable nuclear fusion energy, the great promise of nuclear fusion energy is that every time in the history of humanity, when human beings have been able to develop a new source of energy, guess what the result has been? An explosion of wealth creation. It makes everyone's lives easier and more comfortable. And so the implication, the great promise of nuclear fusion energy, is the reason it's considered the holy grail of energy, is that being able to use nuclear fusion energy provides a source of unlimited, clean energy for everyone on the planet forever, or at least until Jesus returns, whichever comes first.
Again, you're leaving us with some real optimism here tonight.
Well, I'm inherently a very optimistic person, because you're talking to someone who's grateful that he does not have cancer anymore. That does wonders for your optimistic outlook. Because 3 years ago, remember President Trump was spared from dying from an assassin's bullet during the election campaign twice.
Yes.
Well, I have something in common, because I was spared from dying of cancer 3 years ago from a malignant melanoma on my abdomen. And I was looking at that. It happened on March, shortly before I ended my contract working from home. I noticed that this mole on my abdomen, which had been with me since birth, was bleeding. And believe it or not, my mind flashed back to a Flintstones cartoon public service announcement commercial in the 1960s, where Fred Flintstone is in the doctor's office. And the doctor says, "Well, you check out just fine, Fred. You might want to familiarize yourself with the 7 warning signals that indicate that you might have cancer." And Fred's driving home in the cartoon. He says, "A change in a wart or a mole, a sore that doesn't heal. What are the others?" And at the end of the commercial, Fred and Barney are speaking to the audience, saying, "Guard those you love. No cancer's warning signals. Give to your American Cancer Society." Yeah, very powerful commercial. It really ought to be re-aired from time to time. But that flashed through my mind. I made an appointment with my dermatologist. On the last day of my contract, went to the office for a dermatology exam. The dermatologist took one look at my abdomen. He said, "That's a malignant melanoma." And he took a laser torch and he gave me some anesthetic. He biopsied a sample right there in the office. And they diagnosed this as a stage 3 melanoma, stage 3A. It was about to spread. They scheduled me for an operation. They got it all. He said, however, the odds are not zero of its reoccurrence. So they put me on Keytruda, 6 infusions of Keytruda, which were immunotherapy designed to trigger my immune system to killing the cancer or any remaining cancer cells. It worked. I'm cancer free. So, yeah, that does wonders for your optimistic outlook on life.
That's amazing. Technology.
Oh, yeah. That was not available, not too many years before I got the cancer. And so that I have always been a very optimistic type of person, but that experience with cancer has simply reinforced it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's you're introduced. The audience now knows you, and absolutely have to have you back.
I'd be interested. Yeah, you can clue me in separate messages or whatever kind of feedback you get from your listeners. You getting it to me personally, I'd probably be flooded like, oh, it's too much.
I'm just looking in the chat here, and people are thanking you for coming out, and what we really need to have you back, maybe even certainly as a regular guest, because if you're willing,
that's fine too.
Yeah.
I'm not going to throw myself in the front of a truck trying to stop you.
Okay. Well, I will drive the truck then.
Very good. Drive carefully.
Yes, I will. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We'll sign off for now. And can we get you back on like maybe next week?
Yeah, that's certainly doable. I'm looking at my 20th century journal. I'm very 20th century that way. I have a written journal, diary types thing. And I don't see any impediments to that. And you and I can negotiate the time of the day and so forth, and that'll work just great.
All right, and with that, we will compromise and come up with a with a date. Yes,
the Russians would not approve of that.
No, but that's okay. Thank you again, sir. And folks, I will stay with you to get into the news stories of the day, and we'll have Colonel Jonathan Lockwood come back and join us again in about a week's time. And thank you again. An absolute privilege and an honor. Really, really appreciate this tonight.
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here.
Okay. Stay with me, folks. See you on the other side of this.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals. Defenders of individual rights and freedoms. Credible. Trusted. Grounded in reality. Maverick News. Maverick News. Defending free speech. Free speech. Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow may be too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay, and yes, go check out the Ukraine show, and those books are available online at Amazon and other fine book retailers online. But tonight, we have to show you some of the highlights, I guess, or at least bring you a little bit of the rally in Oshawa with Pierre Poilievre, because I know a lot of you very interested in what's going on there. Massive crowd again. Let's go to the video now. Hang on a second here. I need to bring this up for you. Would have brought it to you live, but we had to follow the schedule that we were on. But hey, even now, it's worth it.
Who's ready to bring change to Canada? Who's ready to axe some taxes? Who's ready to build some homes for a change? Who's ready to stop the crime for a change? And who's ready to put Canada first for a change? Wow. What an incredible crowd. I decided I would come and visit with my very closest friends in Oshawa. And this is the crowd you bring. Look, this incredible 6,000 people from Oshawa here to put our country first and bring home the Canada we love. Okay. Oh, Sasik, my little guy Cruz, our pilot here. We've got a little pilot here. Show him, look at that pilot jacket. He sees all these planes, and I asked him, do you want a plane or do you want a helicopter? And his answer was, yes. I think he wants both. So if the security turns their eyes away for any amount of time, I'm afraid you might lose one of these airplanes. Our little guy might take it up for a spin. But before I go any further, let me just acknowledge that we had a terrible medical emergency here. A gentleman collapsed, and we thought we'd lost him. But then an amazing and courageous nurse came to the rescue. Jennifer, come up on stage. Come on over. Thank you. Give Jennifer a big round of applause. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. What a hero. Amazing, Jennifer. How long have you been a nurse for?
Oh, that's a tough one. 17, 18 years old.
Wow. Here in Oshawa? Amazing. Well, on behalf of everyone in this room, and behalf of the blessed gentleman who I believe is in the loving hands of our paramedics, doctors, and nurses, we say thank you, thank you, thank you. You are a great Canadian hero. Thank you. A great Canadian hero, like so many. We're so blessed to have the greatest people on earth, courageous, giving, generous, patriotic, in solidarity one with the other. Our people deserve the best country in the world. Our flag represents the best country in the world, and we are going to restore the promise of the best country in the world. The great Canadian promise. It's the promise that anyone who works hard gets a great life in a beautiful house on a safe street, protected by brave soldiers under our proud flag. That was the great Canadian promise that gave me my start in life, that allowed my wife to come here as a refugee from Venezuela. 6 people crammed into a small basement Montreal apartment, but all of them have succeeded and enjoyed a great life as a result of the promise this country has to offer. And unfortunately, it's been 10 years, the lost Liberal decade. The lost Liberal decade. Everything costs more, with food prices up 37% faster in Canada than in the United States. Housing costs have doubled, with the worst housing price inflation of any country in the G7, and the fewest homes per person in any of those countries, even though we have by far the most land to build on. Crime, chaos, drugs, and disorder overtake our once safe streets. And yet, the Liberals have weakened our economy with high taxes and anti-resource laws, a radical net zero ideology which stands for net zero growth. They have driven $500 billion south, and they have weakened our economy, making us more dependent and vulnerable than ever before on the Americans. So the question in this election is very simple. After the lost Liberal decade of rising costs and crime and a falling economy under the thumb of the Americans, are we going to elect them for a fourth Liberal term, or is it... No, we're not. We cannot afford to elect this disastrous Liberal government for a fourth term. It is time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government. Bring it home. Bring it home. Wow. Bring it home. This side wants to axe the tax, this side wants to bring it home. Why don't we do both? And why don't we do it with a great Conservative team? We have Rhonda Kirkland for Oshawa. Jamil Giovanni for a change in Durham. Greg Brady for a change in Ajax. And we have Steve Yamada for a change in Whitby. And I think a number of our other candidates have snuck in the door, but I'm not going to mention them all because I don't want to leave anyone else, just the ones that are closest by. So all of you know who to vote for. Get the message out. Tell all the people you've ever met that you need to elect these 4 people in this great region. We need a change in Canada, and this is the Canada First team to deliver that change. Parce que le choix dans les élections qui s'en viennent, c'est est-ce que les libéraux méritent un 4e mandat après la décennie?
All right, so big crowd and a lot of excitement there and a lot of concerns about the tariffs. As I said earlier, I think even as they've been rolled out tonight, we don't really know we still don't really know exactly how they're working. Now, yesterday we heard from one of our callers, Leo, that the shutdown of the Windsor auto plant announced by Stellantis, the 2-week shutdown there, that wasn't because of the tariffs, but indeed the union, the company, both saying that it is because of the Trump tariffs. Assess it as you will, but that's what they're saying. And Mark Carney tonight announcing that Canada will respond with reciprocal tariffs against the U.S. tariffs for foreign automobiles being imported into the United States that do not meet USMCA or CUSMA, CUSMA, U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade content criteria. If there isn't like 75% North American content in the vehicle, it doesn't qualify. 25% tariff. Canada's going to do that with anything produced in the United States. And there are quite a few different vehicles that are not CUSMA or USMCA compliant. There's a Volvo Polestar. There are just a bunch of different vehicles that are produced down there that are imported into Canada that will be subject to this 25% tariff. Here's Mark Carney tonight on the whole trade war, bringing us up to date. He suspended his campaign
nous avons augmenté le financement des agences de développement régionales.
Crisis, at least for the day or two.
Fighting back against U.S. tariffs and protecting our workers are our most immediate priorities. But they are not sufficient. Our task as a nation in the coming weeks and months and years is to think bigger and to act bigger. We can draw strength right now from each other. From Canadians who are supporting local businesses, Canadians who are buying Canadian, Canadians who are changing their travel plans, and Canadians who are helping each other as neighbors. We are powerful when we act together. From providing refuge to stranded passengers in Gander to fighting forest fires in California, Canadians have done extraordinary things for Americans when they needed it most. Now, more than ever, we need to do extraordinary things for ourselves. We will need to do things previously thought impossible at speeds we haven't seen in generations. Breaking down internal trade barriers so that we can have one Canadian economy, not 13. Making Canada more productive and competitive. Building things in this country again. Millions more homes. Building clean and conventional energy. Building more public transport, more mines, more assembly lines. Building new trade corridors with reliable partners. Building a Canada that works for everyone. A Canada that everyone can afford. A Canada worthy of its people. Last week, I met a teacher from Glen Williams Public School in Georgetown, Ontario. And she told me about a routine assignment, that she had given to her 9 and 10-year-olds. And the children were asked to describe their dreams for Canada. So some kids wrote about a country free of poverty, others dreamt of clean air and water, or a place where everyone enjoyed equal rights, dignity, and respect. These are what we all want for ourselves and for each other. But many also wrote about tariffs and threats to our sovereignty, words that I hadn't met at that age. And I'm going to quote one which is representative. I dream of a safe, a kind, and a clean Canada. A Canada that is not the U.S. Our children should be able to dream about a positive future, not worry about an economic crisis. Les Canadiens et Canadiennes sont inquiets.
We'll be hearing more in the days ahead as Carney resumes his Liberal campaign, suspending it, as I said, briefly anyway, to just, according to him, to focus on this crisis, this economic crisis brought on by Donald Trump and the tariff war. And so tonight, markets took a major hit. They took a major hit today because of Trump rolling out these sweeping tariffs on nearly all U.S. imports. It's a move that's shaking up global trade in a big way, and investors are not happy. And they made that very clear today with a brutal sell-off. The S&P 500 plunged almost 5%, wiping out roughly $2 trillion in value. Did you get that number? $2 trillion in a day? That's the biggest one-day drop since June of 2020, back when we were deep in the COVID mess, and the Dow wasn't far behind today, falling 4%, its worst day since that same month 5 years ago. And the NASDAQ, it tanked 6%, the steepest decline since March 2020. Some sectors got hit harder than others. Retail stocks were pummeled. Think Nike down 14.5%. Lululemon off 10%. Ralph Lauren shedding 16%. Why? Well, these new tariffs could climb as high as 54% on manufacturing giants like China. And that's bad news for companies relying on imported goods. Oil drillers didn't fare much better. Valero Energy lost 15%, and crude oil prices dropped nearly 7% over fears that global growth is about to slow down. Small businesses weren't spared either. The Russell 2000 index, which tracks those smaller firms, fell 6.6% today. It's down more than 20% since its peak in November, officially in bear market territory now. This market rout is a loud early judgment on Trump's massive tariff plan. Even before this week, his back and forth trade ideas had investors, CEOs, and everyday folks like you and me feeling uneasy. Now, with these policies in motion, markets are screaming pessimism about a president who promised a quick fix to an economy that's been chugging along, more or less. And now analysts are starting to sound the recession alarm louder by the day. For years, American shoppers, that's you and I and others like us, not just American shoppers, but Canadian shoppers, have been the world's go-to consumers. Yeah, the American market is perhaps the most affluent in the world, buying up goods made cheaply overseas. That's what they do in the US of A. And that's led to trade deficits, of course, that Trump is always griping about. He pointed out yesterday with a chart, that chart that he was holding up, showing what other countries are charging the US. But really, he was just highlighting those deficits. And I am pretty sure that the methodology behind the mathematics is quite flawed, frankly. I'm certain of that because of the way that they were rolling in other things like currency, exchange rates, and other government subsidies and things of that nature. It's just a flawed way of creating these numbers. Take Cambodia, for example. The U.S. buys way more from Cambodia than Cambodia buys from the United States. Now, does that mean that Cambodia is ripping off the United States? No. Most economists, most serious economists, kind of put it like this. You spend your money at the grocery store, but they don't buy anything from you. Your boss pays you, but you don't sell them stuff. It's just how trade works. You know, you go to the store, you go to the department store, you buy your stuff. One side gives you stuff, you give them money. Then they're not obligated to buy back from you, but you transact in the opposite way with other people. The point is, the catch, fixing those deficits might mean bringing low-wage labor, heavy jobs back to the United States. That's manufacturing. But you're talking about what? Manufacturing from places like I pointed out yesterday, Sri Lanka, where the average annual income is about $3,000 to $4,000 per year. That's because those are all low-wage, labor-intensive jobs. They're making, clothing, textiles. All those jobs left the United States and Canada many years ago. They went to low-wage countries. Do you want those low-wage jobs back? Maybe, I guess, I suppose, but you're going to end up paying a lot more for the clothes if you have shops that have higher wages. Just brace yourself for higher prices, folks. This whole thing is going to squeeze American wages and spending power. This is really a worst case scenario. Whenever you look at any economic marker, when you look at anything I was ever taught about economics indicates that this is a recipe for disaster, and we have world leaders reeling tonight, worried that we could be plunged into a worldwide recession, maybe even worse. This could potentially trigger a depression. I think people are afraid to even use the D word, but I think it's out there already. If this proceeds, it's that serious. Those 25% tariffs on auto imports that Trump announced, well, they kicked in overnight. Foreign-made auto parts get slapped with 25% levies by May 3rd. And so pretty soon, every car sold in the United States is going to be more expensive because of that. And it makes the entire economy in the United States less competitive because these tariffs trickle down. It isn't just isolated to specific products. Each tariff, because this is across the board and affecting so many things, it's really going to become integrated into every single product and service that is transacted, sold in the United States. So markets were already shaky coming into this week. The S&P 500 and NASDAQ just had their worst quarter in years, mostly thanks to all of this trade uncertainty, this chaos. And it's not just the United States. Overseas markets took a beating today as well. And of course, Canada is not immune to any of this. Japan's main index and Europe's stocks at 600 both dropped to 2.7%. The UK's FTSE 100 fell 1.7%, and German, French, and Italian markets slid around 3%. So buckle up, folks. Trump's tariff gamble is shaking things up. And we're along for the ride, like it or not. I'll be right back.
You know, someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the Founding Fathers. If we lose freedom here, there's no place to escape to. This is the last stand on earth.
The entire world is watching.
Every dictator, every crazy dictator in the world is watching. The world is watching. On TV, the entire world is watching. On social media.
But the entire world is watching, and yes, they are seeing what we have apparently bravely been willing to say that others are thinking.
Stand for freedom. Literally stand for freedom. Let's get this done. The entire world is watching.
We're at war with the most dangerous enemy that has ever faced mankind in his long climb from the swamp to the stars.
Maverick News. Maverick News. Maverick News.
Let me have more control of my own destiny.
The world is watching.
Ontario is the province that I think is about to take it on the chin hardest because of these tariffs. If, in fact, it comes to taking it on the chin, I still don't know how much impact it's really going to have on the auto sector because of the USMCA exemptions, but it's got to have some sort of an impact. Ontario Premier Doug Ford tonight. Now, he just came off his election, won his election, of course, and has a clear mandate from the people to proceed with his Team Canada approach to all of this. And I think he played it smart, frankly, by just deciding to go to the polls and call an election when he did. And I think that he is now on a very solid footing heading into this these choppy trade waters that lie ahead. And here he is after meeting with the Prime Minister today, talking about the tariffs, of course.
We just finished our FMM call with the Prime Minister, had the discussions regarding President Trump's comments yesterday. You know, we all agreed that we got the best of a bad deal, which in my opinion is still totally unacceptable. The only thing that's acceptable is zero tariffs. We're going to continue targeting zero tariffs. I do believe, and I would support retaliation tariffs, very similar to what they have against us in the auto sector, but that is strictly up to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I understand, will be coming out at 11:30. But I can tell you, he reassured us that he'll be there for the auto companies to support them. We'll be there as well. I put a call in to Mark Stewart, the Unifor representative, just a minute ago. I called him again last night just to reassure him that we're going to be there and support him. I believe, and this is really because of our relationship that we built, that we were going down there, we were communicating constantly, and you know, there was a big relief. We didn't see our name on the list, but that doesn't mean these tariffs are disappearing. So I'm a strong supporter of showing the U.S. that we negotiate through strength, not weakness, and it'll be up to the Prime Minister to tell the country how we're going to retaliate.
Premier, what is your government going to do for the auto workers who are already being laid off? And we don't know for how long. Stellantis issued a notice last night. We are hearing that in the United States, Stellantis factories are also going to be shutting down.
Well, we're working with the federal government. They'll be making announcements, and we'll be there to support the auto workers every which way we can.
Through retraining, through some...
Well, I hope it doesn't come to retraining, because hopefully this plant's going to reopen. It's a temporary shutdown. I've mentioned my concerns to the CEO of Stellantis and how we need to have this plant up and going, which it should be up and going.
Do we have a better understanding right now exactly what is being applied to the auto sector and what could be exempt?
Well, what I understand, Colin, and as you saw yesterday, it's about as clear as mud, but this is what I'm understanding, that eventually it's going to be half of let's say a vehicle's 50% American parts, then half of those Canadian parts are going to be tariffed, which equals 12.5%. But 12.5% still is unacceptable. We have to get down to 0%.
Premier, the Stellantis is laying off 900 people in Michigan and Indiana already because of the Windsor shutdown and
yes.
Mexican plant shutdowns. Is that faster than you expected? And what kind of message do you think that is going to send to the Trump administration?
Well, thank you for that question. I've been saying all along, I thought it would last about a week, but obviously it's right down to days now on the supply chain. And I've been saying this over and over again, a tariff on Canada is a tax on Americans. I mentioned Termination Day. There's a perfect example. That's just one company, one sector, not to mention all the other sectors. If they continue wanting to go after our lumber is used for housing in the U.S. It's a high-grade lumber, and that's just going to drive the cost up of housing. If they go after, continue to go after the auto sector, it's going to drive the cost up of autos for Americans. And if they go after our pharmaceuticals, especially seniors that rely on more cost-effective pharmaceuticals, that's going to drive the cost up. I'm very happy to see some of the senators, Republican senators, supporting us. Rand Paul, very vocal. He said a tariff on Canada would drive the U.S. into a recession. I agree with those comments. I'm glad that we're bringing the temperature down. It was absolutely essential that everyone just cools out a little bit and thinks straight. Because as the president mentioned yesterday, you saw the list of all the countries. He has bigger issues than targeting his closest friends and allies, but we're going to continue communicating with our counterparts in the U.S., the Congress, the Senate, and as well as the governors. And yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead.
What's on the table right now for Ontario potential equality issues?
Well, something, I'm going to let the Prime Minister respond to that at 11:30. On Ontario's side, we're still going to keep the alcohol off the shelves, and that's one of the impacts. But as you say, it's an irritant.
Are you calling for a stronger response than what we're going to see from Mr. Carney at 11:30? You said you supported a strong response, but you're not telling us what he's going to do.
Yeah, just to be fair to the Prime Minister, I think it's a fair response. I appreciate all the support across the country, and it's every premier. There's no exclusions. I'm glad to see the support of premiers out in the West as well, because I think it's a measured response, and that's what we need to do.
Premier, are you going to be continuing your own discussions with Howard Lutnick and his team, or are you sort of taking a step back and deferring to the Prime Minister on this?
Well, we're all working together. We're working with, Secretary Lutnick. We had great conversations with him. I spoke to the Prime Minister late last night, along with Dominic LeBlanc as well. It's really a Team Canada effort right now. We're all working together. The Prime Minister actually encouraged all the premiers to continue their consultation, collaboration with their counterparts in the U.S. And I think that's so critical that we continue to do that.
And Premier, it seems like you've been working closely with Mark Carney, and you mentioned that your MPPs would be too swamped to do anything in this election campaign.
Yes.
At least yesterday, that did not seem to be the case with Caroline Mulroney. I'm just wondering if she sought your permission to endorse Pierre Poilievre, if you gave it, and also what you make of your campaign manager's recent comments towards the CPC.
Yeah, so twofold. I said it's really up to the MPPs what they want to do. Caroline called me. I think the world of Caroline, by the way. She does an incredible job as president of the Treasury, and asked me, and that's up to Caroline, and good for her and everyone else. But we need to focus on our job. Our number one job is to make sure we continue to protect the people of Ontario, focus on the tariffs. I do want to make a comment about the outages right across the north. It's heartbreaking. You get these messages, and I'm getting like every 15 seconds messages. And we have now 3,700 boots on the ground from all over. I want to thank, which I did, thank Francois Legault, Premier of Quebec, for sending Quebec Hydro, as well as Scott Moe over in Saskatchewan, and everyone from Windsor Hydro to all the way up, all the GTA and in Toronto. We've reconnected over 800,000 homes, and we still have right around about 190,000 more to go. We're working full out. Again, we have the teams out there from emergency management, the Ontario Corps, warming centers, food's brought in. I got to give a shout out to a couple, Rubicon and Global Medics. They're out there supporting, be it food or cutting down trees. And I just want to thank the people. I mentioned yesterday, when someone's internet is down and televisions are down, we have to come up with a new mechanism to communicate, because it's very difficult to communicate when people don't have the ability to watch the television. So I think we have to come up with something with the cell phones, because that's their number one concern out there is communication. I know the CEO is going to be up there today in Oro Medonte. I'll be heading up tomorrow to see how I can support anyone up there.
This is the last question.
Yeah, go.
On the auto tariffs, the American president has made it very clear that he wants to relocate manufacturing to the United
That's right.
States. I know it's 12%, not 25%, but
Yeah.
where do you see the threat level right now when it comes to those tariffs in the auto manufacturing sector? Is the threat still fairly high in your view?
I think the threat's very high. Even at 12.5%, these auto companies aren't making money hand over fist. They're basically trying to get by day by day and keep their people employed. So our goal is to continue negotiating down to a 0%. I truly believe the president's waiting for this election to be over on April 28th. I can't wait for it to be over. Tell the president I'll call him back in a minute. But anyways, we're going to continue. We're going to continue working hand in hand with the administration, with the federal government as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Okay. So we're done with Premier Ford. Hang on here. We have, you want to go to the gaggle on Air Force One? Want to go to let's go on the gaggle on Air Force One. I've got another thing out of McGill University too that I want to share with you. Okay, here's here in Kanakistan, we tend to call them scrums, but this is the media on Air Force One asking the president.
$5 million this can be used.
This one here. I wanted to show you this
First of the
tonight.
cards. See that? You know what that card is? Gold card. It's the gold card. The Trump card, gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me. I'm the first. I don't know, but I'm the first buyer. It'll be out in about less than 2 weeks, probably. Pretty exciting, right?
Ready for some questions?
Anybody want to buy one? Okay, let's go.
First, we'd love to get your reaction, sir, to what's going on in the financial markets today.
Well, I mean, it's to be expected. This is a patient that was very sick. We really inherited a terrible economy, as you know, with a lot of problems, including loss of manufacturing and plants closed up all over the country. You know, we've lost 90,000 plants since NAFTA, if you think of that. 90,000. It's not even believable. And about 6 million jobs. And so it was a sick patient that went through an operation on Liberation Day. and it's going to be a booming country, a very booming country. It's going to be amazing, actually, and we see it because we have trillions of dollars committed to come in, trillions.
Sir, can I ask you, when you say that it was an operation and the patient's healthy now, does that mean you see us as kind of towards the high water mark in terms of how high?
Sure. The operation's over, and now we let it settle in. You see the plants are starting to construction already. We have many plants. Indiana, massive auto plant, the Honda, and we have so many plants, and they'll be under construction. And as they start to build, you're going to see a lot of construction jobs, and you're going to see a lot of jobs when they open.
Does that mean chips and pharma tariffs are not on the table?
Starting very soon. The chips are starting very soon. The pharma is going to be starting to come in, I think, at a level that you haven't really seen before. We are looking at pharma right now, pharmaceuticals, as a separate category, and we'll be announcing that sometime in the near future, not too distant future. That's under review right now.
Are you negotiating with partners currently?
What we have is a set of tariffs based on what they've been charging us. That's reciprocal. And those tariffs have come in, and every country's called us. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. If we would have asked some of these countries, almost most of these countries, to do us a favor, they would have said no. Now they'll do anything for us. But we have tariffs, they've been set, and it's going to make our country very rich.
Are you open to deals with these countries if they're calling you?
Well, it depends. If somebody said that we're going to give you something that's so phenomenal, as long as they're giving us something that's good. For instance, with TikTok as an example, we have a situation with TikTok where China will probably say, we'll approve a deal, but will you do something on the tariff? The tariffs give us great power to negotiate. Always have. I've used them very well in the first administration, as you saw, but now we're taking it to a whole new level because it's a worldwide situation.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's very exciting to see.
I don't know if it's. I don't think exciting would be the word I would use.
To our country, and you're going to see construction starting all over. I already got a couple of calls from Lee Zeldin from Environmental. He's got some big plans to approve, like really big plans.
How long will it take to get American manufacturing, to where you would like to see it?
Well, let's say it's a 2-year process. They start a plant, and they're big plants. We're giving them approval to also, in many cases, to build the electric facility with it. So you have electric generation and a plant, and they're big plants. Now, the good news is a lot of money for them, and they can build them fast, but they're still very big plants. So I'd always say it would take a year and a half to 2 years.
Mr. President, I'm curious.
They've already started some of them.
Have you been following the New York City mayor's race? And specifically, Andrew Cuomo is now the front runner, according to the polls. How do you feel about that? Do you think you could have a good relationship with the mayor, Andrew Cuomo?
Well, I've always gotten along with him. We had our ins and outs a little bit. We did a great job for him. Remember, we built the convention center rooms for him. He didn't use them, unfortunately. And we sent the Mercy ship. We sent the really magnificent hospital ship, and they didn't use it. But we always had a pretty good relationship.
You going to make an endorsement in that race?
Well, it's not something I'm thinking about yet. Is he thinking about running? Yeah.
Russia, Ukraine. There's a Russian envoy in town for some meetings. Can you give us an update on how that's going?
We do. We have an envoy from Russia. We're talking about it. We'd like to see that stop as soon as possible because thousands of people are being killed a week. Soldiers, mostly soldiers, and Ukrainian soldiers and Russian soldiers. And you're losing 2,000, 3,000 sometimes a week. So we're spearheading the drive to get it done. Europe has not been successful in dealing with President Putin, but I think I will be successful.
So I want to ask you about the NSC. How many staffers were let go and why? Your National Security Council. How many staffers were let go?
There were some. Always we're going to let go of people that we don't like, or people that we don't think can do the job, or people that may have loyalties to somebody else. You'll always have.
I guess that's happened because Laura Loomer came in
Israel
and
has now talked about
named some
staying in
names and
Gaza
said you
in
should
long-term
fire these people, and he
occupation.
did.
Has anything changed in regard to the U.S. Gaza-Israel plans?
I spoke to him today, as a matter of fact, and I think he's going to be coming to our country sometime in the not too distant future, maybe next week. And we'll speak about Israel, and we'll speak about what's going on. That's another thing we'd like to get solved, and I think we will get it solved. But I think he very well may be coming next month. Benjamin Netanyahu.
Sir, can I follow up on your earlier comment about TikTok? You said that the Chinese might be willing to agree to approve that sale in exchange for tariff relief. Is that something that you've floated to them, or you've heard from them, or?
No, I'm just using that as an example. Let's say we had a problem with TikTok, and let's say China wasn't going to approve. We could use tariffs in order to get it approved. You give them something in return.
What's the update on the deal negotiations for TikTok?
We're very close to a deal with a very good group of people for TikTok.
Is it multiple investors? Just
multiple.
And then did the last minute bids kind of throw things into disarray for you, or do you have your strategy completely locked up on who's going to?
Which last minute?
On acquiring TikTok.
No, I think that China maybe will call and say, well, we're upset with the tariffs, and maybe they want to get something a little bit in order to get TikTok approved. Who knows? I have no knowledge of that, but that's the kind of thing that we're on.
Can you give us any update on the Palestinian relocation plan? Are we talking to any countries?
When does your resort open?
Try and solve the Gaza problem. It's been a problem for many years, for many, many decades. It's been a big problem. I've met with, as you know, a lot of the hostages. It's a terrible situation. But if you notice, hostages are being released now. And that's happened only since I got involved. So we have hostages being released, quite a few, actually.
You're still committed to the relocation?
I'd like to get as many hostages as we can. And then Gaza is a very, very important thing. It's been under siege for many, many years. And it's a shame. It's a shame. A lot of people die in Gaza. Gaza's been a place we have a lot of people die. A lot of bad things happen in Gaza. We'll see what we can do about it.
Dinner tonight. Can you tell us about it? Who's going to be there? Any leaders?
So dinner tonight is sort of I have a.
Okay, enough of that. Enough of that for the moment. Yeah, the situation down there in Windsor, Stellantis confirming that it's shutting down that assembly plant now for 2 weeks and announcing that it is largely because of the U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles. Company spokespeople or executives there saying that they're temporarily pausing production. Now, they're also saying the assembly line could restart the week of April 21st. And the company continues to assess the effects of the tariffs on imported vehicles. And they'll continue to engage, they say, with the Trump administration on the policy changes. And then union leaders down there, Unifor, Local 444, say that about 4,500 people are affected by this, working in various jobs and trades at the Stellantis factory. That's where they produce the Chrysler Pacifica minivan, Chrysler Grand Caravan, and Dodge Charger Daytona. So we're looking at, I don't think that every single person is actually going to be laid off for the 2 weeks, but at least 3,000, 3,200, somewhere in that range will be affected. And of course, they'll get, layoff pay, and then they'll be back to work, hopefully, in a couple of weeks. And the union is saying that they see this as a border auto tax, and they say it's unjustified. Unifor leaders saying that there is a sense of betrayal among local Stellantis workers in Windsor and in the community at large by the Trump administration on this issue. So we continue to follow that, and we'll continue to watch for the fallout from that, the impact that this is going to have on not just Windsor, but just all communities across Canada and the United States, frankly, because this is everything I know about economics indicates this is going to result in economic contraction. Senator Rand Paul in the U.S. on Fox News, here's what he has to say about it. He's not in favor of this. He's very much opposed to these tariffs.
What's the rationale for getting behind this? Well, one, we should not live under emergency rule. The Constitution.
And they're talking here about this vote that they had to block Trump's tariffs, but it did pass, but it's not binding. They still need to take another step forward and get enough Democrats and Republicans on side to make this kind of thing work. It can be done, and it may be done because this is so disruptive. We'll restart this.
What's the rationale for getting behind this? Well, one, we should not live under emergency rule. The Constitution said taxes are raised by Congress. Most specifically, taxes originate in the House and come to the Senate. So I'm against emergency rule. But on the tariffs in particular, on the idea of trade, trade is proportional to wealth. The last 70 years of international trade has been an exponential curve upwards, and the last 70 years of prosperity has been upwards also. We are richer because of trade with Canada, and so is Canada. Whenever you trade with somebody, when an individual buys somebody else's product, it's mutually beneficial or you wouldn't buy it. If the trade is voluntary, it's always beneficial. There is no Canada versus the U.S. The consumer wins when the price is the lowest price. Tariffs raise prices and they're a bad idea for the economy. But what if this is,
Yeah, because it makes the entire economy less competitive. It makes, and therefore, less competitive globally. And those pushing to find a way to block Trump's tariff war, because he's using the justification for doing this as being a national security issue, and in order to usurp these powers as president, in order to push through these tariffs against all countries in the world. He's literally gone to war, initiating a trade war with the whole world. As insane as that sounds, he has actually done that. And that's why we are on the verge potentially of a massive economic contraction, disruption. This is really actually very scary. Very scary. Also tonight, just a story of note that I think maybe a lot of you are not aware of. A standoff at McGill University. Pro-Palestinian protesters, hundreds of them. They, a lot of these protesters wearing masks or keffiyehs, the head coverings that, a lot of Palestinian protesters wear. They put up banners in front of classrooms, inside campus buildings, spraying red paint on doors that was supposed to be symbolic of blood. Here's a picture of a poster that was sent around or distributed, certainly online, to promote this protest that has now escalated into something a little bit more serious than just a standard protest. April 2nd to 4th, Palestinian liberation, McGill strike in support of Palestinian liberation. And indeed, it does look very much like some sort of a strike action. Let's show you the video. Montreal, McGill University. Here we are. Got it. Heavy police presence here tonight. You're all the same.
SPDM, you're all the same.
All right, we're not done. More ahead. Stay with me.
Greetings, brave Mavericks. Our quest for truth continues. We go beyond fake news. Together we expose propaganda. Together we pull others out of rabbit holes. We are maverick thinkers. We are all unique individuals, defenders of individual rights and freedoms, credible, trusted, grounded in reality. Maverick News, Maverick News. Defending free speech, Donate at freedomreporters.com. Do it now. Tomorrow, maybe too late. Maverick News. The world is watching.
Okay. We have other stuff here. Let me just keep cleaning up this video feed window. All right. Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte today. And this was, I think, there were other NATO meetings too and news conferences with other leaders, but this one the most significant today, I think, because as mentioned in our interview with Colonel Lockwood earlier, Marco Rubio asserting that the United States will indeed remain part of NATO, possibly putting, to easing somewhat fears that Donald Trump may be in the process of exiting NATO. Not so, says Marco Rubio today.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, dear Marco. A warm welcome to NATO, your first foreign ministers meeting. But before I continue, let me express my condolences about the 4 US soldiers who died during exercises in Lithuania. Our thoughts are with their family, their friends, their colleague soldiers, and we have the deepest respect for their service. I also want to highlight the work being done by the US, Lithuania, but also Poland and Estonia to work around the clock, basically to do everything to make sure that they would be recovered. But again, we are very sad about their death. Marco, I want to commend you for your tireless diplomacy over the last couple of months. You have traveled the whole world. I also want to thank you for what you did before as a senator, supporting NATO. And we will have a lot to discuss over the coming 2 days. Of course, Ukraine, as I said before, President Trump, the team, you broke the deadlock. You started a process of negotiations with our full support to bring the Ukraine war to a lasting, to a durable peace. And in the meantime, the Europeans are stepping up, providing a lot of military support into Ukraine, and we have seen the latest numbers coming in that overall NATO allies have provided in the first 3 months over $20 billion in support to Ukraine to make sure they can stay in the fight as long as it continues. We will also discuss the other threats over the next 2 days. Of course, Russia, which is our long-term threat, but also the increasing problems we have with China, of course, North Korea, Iran, and all of these 4 getting more and more connected, and these 2 theaters getting more and more connected and working intertwined. We know that the United States is a staunch ally in NATO. I had a very good meeting with the President, with President Trump, but that commitment comes with an expectation. And the expectation is that the European allies and Canada need to spend more. Since Trump 45, the aggregate extra spending from Canada and Europe has been $700 billion up to now. But when you look at the hundreds of billions of euros/dollars now rolling in the last couple of months, this is probably the biggest surge in defense spending we have seen in Canada and Europe since the Cold War, since the Berlin Wall came down. So that is good news, but still we need to do more. And then, of course, we will meet with the partners from Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand, also to discuss another important issue, which is defense industrial production and how we can do more with them to work together. So lots of ground to cover. But again, a warm welcome. Please.
Thank you, and thank you. And I'm glad you had a good meeting. I know I was out of the country while you were there, but I know you had a good meeting with the president. Thank you for your condolences at the 4 Americans who tragically lost their lives in an important training exercise. We honor them, and it also reminds us that the United States is in NATO. We are as we speak right now, the United States is as active in NATO as it has ever been. And some of this hysteria and hyperbole that I see in the global media and some domestic media in the United States about NATO is unwarranted. President Trump's made clear he supports NATO. We're going to remain in NATO. He's made clear, but our first ambassador that got out of the United States Senate is our ambassador to NATO, who joins us here today on his first hour on the job. So all of that is a testament to it. But we want NATO to be stronger. We want NATO to be more viable. And the only way NATO can get stronger and more viable is if our partners, the nation states that comprise this important alliance, have more capability. This is a collection not just of partners and allies, but of advanced economies, of rich countries who have the capability to do more. We understand that's a trade-off. We have to do it every single year in our country. I assure you that we also have domestic needs, but we've prioritized defense because of the role we've played in the world, and we want our partners to do the same. And I understand there's domestic politics after decades of building up vast social safety nets that maybe don't want to take away from that and invest more in national security. But the events of the last few years, a full-scale ground war in the heart of Europe, is a reminder that hard power is still necessary as a deterrent. And so we do want to leave here with an understanding that we are on a pathway, a realistic pathway, to every single one of the members committing and fulfilling a promise to reach up to 5% of spending. That includes the United States will have to increase its percentage. Because if the threats truly are as dire as I believe they are, and the members of this alliance believe they are, then that threat has to be confronted by a full and real commitment to have the capability to confront these things, to confront them. And that's been the message President Trump had in his first administration, and it's the one he brings into this one. He's not against NATO. He is against a NATO that does not have the capabilities that it needs to fulfill the obligations that the treaty imposes upon each and every member state. And it wants our nation, and no one expects that you're going to be able to do this in 1 year or 2, but the pathway has to be real. This is the hard truth, but it is a basic one that needs to be said now in order for us to prove, and in order for us to build the kind of NATO that has the capability to defend the territories of our nation states and deter any action that would be aggressive against any one of us. So I hope to have a chance to engage on that here today in our conversations. I'm sure we will. Of course, we're also happy to be joined by our Indo-Pacific partners who have become great partners to the alliance as we also see increased threats to both freedom of navigation and territorial integrity in the Indo-Pacific. So we look forward to engaging them as well in this context. And thank you for the chance to be here in my first visit. I hope it'll be very productive.
It will.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so Trump and the U.S. will remain in NATO, I guess. So we're told. But things sure do feel very unstable tonight, don't they? Still. Something still don't feel right. Now, I guess with that, we should just say that, yes, I will continue to follow this story about the guilty verdict of Freedom Convoy organizers Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, both found guilty on mischief. The other charges against them dismissed. Mentioned it earlier, so they still have to go to sentencing, and that will be the really big story, I would say, to determine exactly how the courts will respond on that front. A lot of people watching that very closely. Today, I saw that Tamara Lich was hailed as a hero by some who cheered her as she left the courthouse. others calling her a traitor and suggesting that she's guilty of treason, being heckled with those words. And that, of course, all connects back to her involvement with the Maverick Party and her separatist movement out west that she has been in the past part of, although they're now wrapping themselves in the flag. How patriotic are they? I guess it depends on your point of view and how you think you need to express your patriotism. Some people see both of them as a threat, an existential threat to some degree against the government, against our country. Others see them as saviors, heroes. Very interesting. Two different tones set in the kind of coverage that we saw today, not unlike the kind of coverage we got during the Freedom Convoy itself. But as more details emerge, you can begin to see a clearer picture of the whole thing over time and get a better understanding of where people stand politically. And you can also begin to see why there's all this infighting within the freedom movement itself. And we'll probably have more to say about that even tomorrow night. But the biggest news maybe today is, well, I don't know. What was the biggest news? The tariffs. Got to be, right? The tariff war, all of that. Still, we haven't even begun to see the real fallout from that yet. One, first day in, massive layoffs in the auto industry already. Yeah, buckle up. It's going to get painful. No question about it. And all these things, one way or another, interconnected. It all comes back to that war in Ukraine, doesn't it? And I have to again say thank you very much to Colonel Lockwood for joining us on the program tonight. We will definitely be having him back. A wealth of knowledge there, insight, expertise. Man, the credentials that we had here on the program tonight were very, very impressive and extreme value in what he had to share with us tonight. Look forward to his next visit here on the program. And yeah, I don't think he was far off the mark when he said that it is those nuclear weapons that makes Russia the power that it is, less so its conventional forces, which is why the conflict in Ukraine continues to drag on tonight and why peace seems so elusive. Not just seems, it is elusive. And with that in mind, I will leave you with Maverick and the News Brothers and Putin Nukem. I will see you guys back here at 7 p.m. Eastern tomorrow on the flip side.
Putin's got a plan, sitting in the Kremlin, dreaming of the days when the Soviets were winning. Ukraine's on its way out, NATO in its sight, but its soldiers keep retreating from the fight. Putin Nukem, you got a thing, you can't stop. Putin Nukem, you got a war hanging up. The world's on edge, he's losing his game, but he's ready to light up the flame. Putin Nukem. You gotta start, you gotta fight. Putin's grim, this is broken with you. Investigate, you cannot view. Putin Nukem. His plans unravel, he goes bruised. The West won't budge and his allies refuse. But instead of retreat, he doubles down. The Russian clouds is his final crown. Putin Nukem, you got a reason's gone. Putin Nukem, you got he sings his swan song. The whole world's watching, hold his breath while he dances with the devil of death. Putin Nukem, you got
This has been a Maverick Multimedia production.